Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do a Friday Reads video. This is where I wrap up the week in reading and I talk about any book-related things that have happened during the week. And it's been a fairly quiet week, so this will be a more Friday Reads-centric video, which is appropriate because I actually finished 3 books this week and really liked all 3 of them. One of them I think is going to be a new favorite book of mine. We'll get to that in a minute. It's been a bit of a quiet week. I also didn't post another video. I did a book haul revisit earlier in the week, but I didn't do anything between then and now. I kind of decided after last week and a couple of weeks where I've managed to post 3 videos in a week, I just kind of wanted a break and to take it a little bit easier, and that was actually very nice. I also did not make a lot of progress on working on my Grapes of Wrath Pulitzer deep dive, but that's fine. It's still coming. I just needed a little time to focus on some other things and chill a little bit. And that was nice and very refreshing. We are heading into warmer weather at last where I live, which does mean this window back here is open. You may hear the rooster. If you follow along and if you were around last summer, you may remember people who live behind me diagonally got a rooster last summer, and it sounded like it was being strangled at all hours of the day, and it's back. I don't know what they did with it in the winter, but it has been back for about a month, and it's loud. So you might hear it, you might not, but just FYI, and FYI for the future as well, because it's probably just going to be there. It is what it is. It's ever present. It's mostly annoying at 3 a.m., but hey, what are you gonna do? And before we get into the Friday Reads portion, just a quick note, Jamie's still doing well. Thank you everyone for continuing to ask and to care. She has been spending a lot of time outside since the weather has been getting nicer, and that's where she is right now. So she's hanging out, and actually this weekend will be interesting because this will be the first time since we got back from her treatment for a nasal tumor that we are going to be boarding her for the weekend. And I know we trust the people who watch her. They are lovely. They love her. She loves them. It is going to be hard to be away because, you know, this is your baby. She's still recovering. The hair has not started growing back yet, but it should. So she's doing well. I'm a stressed father right now just because we're going to be away from her for the weekend, but you know, that it'll be good for me to get over that a little bit and remind myself that we can go somewhere and it will be fine. So it'll be healthy. Let's jump into the Friday Reads portion of this because I'm really excited to talk about all 3 of these books actually, and talk a little bit about what I have coming up in the rest of the month of May. The first book that I finished this week was something that I was almost done with when I did my last Friday Reads video, which will be linked down below. It's Whose Names Are Unknown by Sanora Babb. This is something that a commenter had brought to my attention when I was reading The Grapes of Wrath. Basically, the gist of it is Sanora Babb was working in FSA camps during the Dust Bowl in California. And she started working on a novel, and she was taking notes of all the people that she was meeting with and also notes for her novel. And she shared these notes with her supervisor. Her supervisor is one of the people that John Steinbeck was working with for facts and for information about how to frame his novel. And her supervisor, unbeknownst to her, gave her notes to John Steinbeck. So unfortunately, she did make a deal to publish this novel, which is what she wrote based on those notes and her experiences working with people in FSA camps. And also, she was from Oklahoma, so she is one of the people who migrated as well. And she had known poverty in her life. And she made a deal to publish this book, but Grapes of Wrath was published first, and it became a phenomenal bestseller, and her publisher contacted her and said, we're not gonna compete with The Grapes of Wrath, so they just shelved her book, and it was never published until 2004, which is right before she died, I believe. And it's interesting as well because I feel like nowadays a publisher would be like, ooh, so that book about this topic is doing well. We should rush our book about that topic out to, you know, have people read this one next. If you like this, try this. Apparently that was not the case in 1939. So that's why this ended up on my radar, and I finished The Grapes of Wrath, and I wanted to make sure I got this book in. It is phenomenal. I really liked it. Joel is actually listening to it. He just started the audio yesterday. I listened to the audio on Scribd as well, although I did get myself a physical copy of it. And what's interesting as well, I mentioned this last week, since I first heard about this book, I have suddenly run into it everywhere. I've seen a copy for sale at my library. I've seen it in my local used bookstore. I've seen it in 2 different bookstores. And it's funny, I never noticed it before. I think it's just one of those things where if you don't recognize a book, it doesn't register in your brain. But once you know about it, it jumps out to you. So all of a sudden I'm seeing it everywhere. So odds are maybe you have seen it as well and just not registered it because you didn't know what it is. Well, that's what it is. I really like it. I think it's a fantastic book. A lot of people commented last week to say that they were going to be picking it up. I would love to hear what you have thought of it, if you have read it by now. And just in general, when you do read it, I really hope people will discover this book and enjoy it as much as I did. I think it's fantastic. And I hope that more people will discover Sanora Babb and this book. It is very personal. It spends a lot more time in Oklahoma than The Grapes of Wrath does. There are startling thematic similarities between the 2 books. And because I haven't spent much time working on my Grapes of Wrath Pulitzer deep dive, I haven't really researched too much. Somebody did say that there is a PBS documentary about Sanora Babb. I could only find a clip in the Ken Burns Dust Bowl documentary. I haven't watched it yet, though. And I'm really looking forward to that. So, and learning more about her. But this is a phenomenal book. This is another one of those books that I feel like I am going to be pointing people toward for a long time because it is really good. So, Whose Names Are Unknown now joins Now in November. And by the way, if you do read this book and enjoy it, I would very strenuously point you toward Now in November by Josephine Johnson. I'm pointing in this direction because that's where my Pulitzer shelves are, and Now in November is on them. And if you read Now in November, because I know I read and loved Now in November last year, and Kim from Middle of the Book March was already a fan, but she did a reread of it last year. If you read it inspired by either me or by her or for any other reason and enjoyed it, I would suggest this as well, because it takes this sort of similar approach where it understands that the personal is political. So it really focuses on a family and their emotional journey and all of that to reflect larger social inequities and things going on in the world in very interesting ways. I'm a very big fan, and I loved it. I feel like I talked about this a fair amount last week because I was almost done with it. I actually took my time with that last hour of the audio because I kind of savored it in an interesting way, so I didn't actually finish it until Monday or Tuesday, even though I only had a little bit left. So that is the first book that I finished. It's absolutely fantastic. I would highly recommend it to you. So I mentioned this joins the ranks of Now in November, but it also joins the ranks of Night of the Living Rez by Morgan Talty and my beloved The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, books that I feel like I'm going to make it my life's mission to tell people about and encourage them to read. And hopefully they will read it and have the same wonderful reaction to it that I did. So that's the first book that I finished this week. The second book I finished this week, surprise, is The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois by Honorée Fannone Jeffers. And I'm losing my words. This is so good. Let me back up a little bit. So, if you follow along, you're aware of the journey that I've been on with The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois. I actually started reading this on February 15th, 2022. And I know that because I never marked this as read or took it off of my story graph. I started reading it then, and I've just left it because I always wanted to get back to it, and I only did a week ago. I started with the audio, and I don't really remember at this point what it was about the audio that I didn't quite like or that was making it a little bit difficult for me to get into, but I could tell I liked the book. So I stopped the audio and got on the hold list for the hardcover at my local library. I got it from my library, and the problem there was I was really taking my time getting through the book. I was loving it, but I was just really taking my time. So I got to the end of the 2 weeks, and I was trying to decide, do I just hold on to it and take my time getting through it, or do I return it and try this again? Because I don't want to make other people suffer, because I'm savoring this book and really deliberately taking my time as I go through it. And what I realized was, at that time, the paperback was about to be released, and I returned the library book and got on the hold list for the paperback. There's always a danger when you put a book down, even if you were loving it, that it will take you a really long time to get back to it. And that's actually part of why I never marked it as read or just took it out of my Goodreads, because I wanted that constant reminder, like, you need to get back to this. You need to get back to this. So I finally did. The thing that really inspired me to finally get back to it is that I read The Netanyahus, which is the book that won the Pulitzer the year that this was published. And let me tell you something. I'll link my full Pulitzer deep dive on The Netanyahus down below. It's a ride. I didn't really like that book. Having finished this, it's even more inexplicable to me that this was not a finalist. The Trees by Percival Everett, I have not read yet, but based on reviews and feedback from other people, I'm also astonished that it was not a finalist. This feels a bit like a foundational book for me now, like another book that I am going to be thinking about and loving for a very long time. Honorée Fannone Jeffers is a poet. She also teaches writing, I believe, in Oklahoma. And you can tell how experienced she is. She has a poet's precision for wordcraft and structure and all of that, but how confidently and skillfully she made the leap from poetry to a massive novel. This is almost 800 pages. It's 790 pages. It's really impressive. So basically, this book is the story of a family. You mostly follow the story of a woman named Ailey Pearl Garfield. This book is a lot of things. It's a coming-of-age story. It's historical fiction. It is about race. It is about America. It is about slavery. It is about feminism. It's about Black feminism. It's doing a lot. But mostly it's the story of Ailey Pearl Garfield. Interspersed throughout are songs. The songs are narrated by ancestors of Ailey Pearl Garfield's family. And they tell the story of her family up to about the point where her parents were born. So you have the story of not just Africans who were kidnapped and sold into slavery and brought to the United States, but also indigenous people. And that is something that I feel is really clever. She's not focusing on one over the other. She's managing to deal with both and the atrocities that were committed to both people. And tells the story of how those people came together and eventually how we worked through the ancestral line up to Ailey and her existence, and how they live in this specific place. It's a fictional town, Chickasetta, Georgia, and in that town is a plantation, and that plantation was originally indigenous land. So in the songs, we hear the stories of the indigenous people who were on that land and how they were eventually displaced or marrying into enslaved families and being subjugated by plantation owners, and how the other ancestors came into the equation as well, and how they sort of settled in this location, and how their stories developed over time. And this is also a book about generational trauma and complicated family dynamics. And if you know me, you know I love a story about complicated family dynamics. And I also am really intrigued by stories of generational trauma. That's why I love Night of the Living Rez, for one reason. And this is all done so confidently. And then the songs open with quotes from the work of W.E.B. Du Bois. And Ailey's story starts when she is a child, so it's a little bit more about her parents. It moves into her adolescence. It moves into her time in college, and then it follows her into her 30s. In that time period, just before Barack Obama became president. So you go from It actually says when she was born, I can tell you, because I'm blanking on the year. There are a lot of people in here. There is a sort of family tree. It's not done like a traditional family tree, but Ailey Pearl Garfield is born 1973, and you follow her life again up to just before Barack Obama was elected president. I can see how someone would read this book and say, this is way too long. It goes for long stretches where nothing's really happening. The narrative is not moving forward. However, I would take issue with that, because to me, the narrative is all of the things that make Ailey who she is. And Honorée Fannone Jeffers, in interviews, has spoken very eloquently about what she wanted to do with this book. She refers to this as a kitchen table epic. And she wrote about, or has spoken about, how epics are traditionally about white men and things that white men do, and it makes them seem heroic. And if not white men, it's about men. So she wanted to do the opposite of that. She wanted to write a book about Black women and allow them to have this sort of sweeping generational epic story. She also has spoken about how so much of life happens around the kitchen table. That's that kitchen table epic part. And it's so smart. Basically, she is focusing on all of the things that make a person, and how their ancestral history will come into play. It's a very realistic book, but there are elements of sort of mysticism in it. For instance, there are characters who will have dreams that give them clues as to what's going on in other people's lives or what might happen in the future. For example, Ailey at one point is having a sexual relationship with somebody she should not be having a sexual relationship with. And while she's talking with her mother kind of brings up that guy, and Ailey lies and says that she's not sleeping with him. And her mother says, really? Well, I had a dream about you and him. So there is an almost mystical element in that. However, here it really works. In situations like the Netanyahus, where there's a dream that foretells something that's about to happen, it is outlandish and weird, and I don't like it. I like how it's employed here. And it sort of involves that tie back to the past. And Ailey and her mother there are people in the family who are more receptive to stories about the past and where they come from and things like that. I think it speaks to that. But anyway, I think all of the information that is in this book that someone could easily say could be removed and edited out to help the pacing. I don't think there's a problem with pacing in this book. But anyway, to me, that's all foundational. Like when Ailey gets to college, there's a lot of time spent on classes that she takes, people that she meets, how she is treated by those people, how she approaches her studies, how her roommates approach their studies, and things like that. I could easily see how someone would say, this is all too much, we don't need it. However, all of that is foundational for who Ailey is. It is really important as a pivot from childhood to her sort of rocky road through adulthood. And you don't get that without all of that time and that care. And Honorée Fannone Jeffers is so good at all of this movement. Ailey feels like one of the most well-realized characters I have ever read in a book. She feels like a real human being who is imperfect, who frequently makes bad decisions, but you understand why they make the bad decisions. Someone who is flawed, but trying. Someone who is funny and depressed and all the multitudes that a human being can be. And you can see how she gets from the child that you meet to the adult that you leave on the last page. And it's beautiful. And I think Honorée Fannone Jeffers is also someone who understands that people change in ways that may be surprising to them. For instance, if you sat teenage me down next to me, sure, there would be similarities. There'd be ways where you'd be able to see that I am the person that teenager grew into. But there would be so many other things. Sure, there are through lines. There are things that will never leave me. And yet, I'm a very different person, and I don't have a lot of the same interests that I did back then. And Ailey is like that. She is, at the time we leave her, sort of a palimpsest of who she has been and all the different versions of her that have existed in the past. And that is really beautiful. And the same goes for her family. They are very tricky and real people, and there are secrets that are revealed because this book is very much about the history of her family. And sometimes people are aware of history and they are not telling other people about. And usually when that happens, it feels like a narrative crutch because the author doesn't want the readers to know that yet, so it feels like they're just putting obstacles in the way arbitrarily to keep that information from coming out. In this case, it feels like a natural product of like, families have secrets. Families have things that they don't really talk about. There are things that are unpleasant to talk about. And there are also the frailties of memory. There is a character whose nickname is Root, who tells stories about things that happened to him, and he meets W.E.B. Du Bois, and the story of how he met him changes over time, and Ailey recognizes this. He is nearly lynched at one point in his past, and he tells this story from Ailey's childhood into her adulthood, and at certain points new details come out that he has not revealed, and it will be because he'll say to her, well, I feel like you're old enough to hear this part of the story now. Or his memory might be changing, and maybe he's confusing bits of the story with the other things that happened. And that is really interesting as well. Everything in this book feels genuine, feels organic, feels real. The plotting, the characters, the dialogue is flawless, and the interactions between the characters feel genuine, and again, just like real family members, and how they relate to each other, how they occasionally betray each other, how they occasionally lie to each other or hurt each other, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not, and how they love each other throughout. Like there's an undercurrent of love, and it's so beautifully and intelligently done. And again, there are parts where there's this really surprising sense of humor, where there's a sort of sly sense of humor. There are moments when there's a sort of dirty sense of humor, and it's such a good book. It's such a good book. I love it. I love it. I love it. I can't imagine anything topping this book to become my favorite read of 2023. I'm so glad I finally got to it. But I mean, things could happen. Things could happen. But this is such a good book. I'm so glad I finally got around to reading it or finishing it. And I would really encourage you to do it. I know this is a tough sell. It's almost 800 pages. And there are parts of it that seem long, that seem like nothing is happening. I can promise you there is a very strong emotional payoff. And I think that emotional payoff at the end is not as powerful. I cried at the end of this book. And I don't think you get that powerful ending without all of the movements and the subtle movements that lead to that point for this character, without understanding the palimpsest of everything, not just the characters, but the history that they stand on and live on and what they have been through. It's a tremendous, tremendous book. And I hope you read it. I hope you're not put off by the size. I hope you're not put off by the fact that there are parts that seem like not much is happening. I promise that all pays off. So you may notice there's a gap on my shelf right there. I used to have this book faced out on my shelf because it is thick enough. I try to have hardcovers faced out because they usually do better than paperbacks standing up. And I have some stands for paperbacks like that one. But this one was sturdy enough that it was able to lie flat, but it did slowly start to warp. The problem with the stands I have is that they have lips. So Joel was kind enough to melt the plastic, so I have a stand that will actually fit the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois now. And there we go. It will live there, and I'm going to be very happy having it over my shoulder whenever I do a video and just seeing it there. So I love that book. I would love to hear your opinion if you have read it in the comment section down below. And I would really hope that more people will discover that book as well. I was about to jump into what's coming up, but there is one more book that I finished this week, and it is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. This was something that was recommended to me by Charlie from Montana Book Company. They read an advance copy of it and told me to look out for it when it was published. I cashed in a credit for it on Libro and listened to it on audio. I have not read an R.F. Kuang book before. I have heard a lot about the book Babb that they published last year, but I have not read it. And so this was my first R.F. Kuang book. The premise is that we have a writer who has published one book, and for various reasons, it didn't go well. Critics didn't quite respond to the book. The publisher never really got behind the book and didn't really support it with a marketing budget or author events or things like that. So it quickly didn't do well upon release and just disappeared to the point where it ended up not even getting a paperback. But this author has a friend named Athena Liu, who she went to college with, and Athena has been having the opposite career. Our author is white, by the way. Her name is June Hayward. Her full name is Juniper Song Hayward. That'll be important later. Her friend Athena Liu has the opposite. She is of Asian descent, and she immediately becomes a literary celebrity. She gets a wild deal on her first novel, which is a success, is nominated for the Booker Prize and a bunch of other major literary awards. And then she quickly, within a span of just a few short years, releases 2 other books. So she releases 3 books in total, each one more successful than the one before. And she becomes someone that people follow on social media, who people will debate sometimes, but mostly just wildly respect and adore. And June doesn't like her. She does keep a relationship with her, but they're not quite friends. They're more like frenemies, and there's a bit of distance between them. However, one night they go out, and Athena invites June back to her house. She goes. Athena dies. And the situation is very specific, but June is able to steal the manuscript that Athena was working on. Athena has this sort of hipster quirk that she loves to tell people about. It's one, like a chicken or the egg thing. Like, does she really like working on a typewriter, or is it an affect that she puts on for the public, or both? Like, to what extent does one inform the other, and does one exaggerate the other? Point being, there are no digital copies of this manuscript. That's the only reason this plot is able to work. Athena writes her manuscript on a typewriter. There are no digital copies. She takes notes in notebooks by hand. There are no digital copies of those notes. And she is notoriously cagey about letting people read her work until she thinks it's ready. So no one has read this manuscript, and probably no one knows what she is working on. So June takes this manuscript, which is about Chinese laborers during World War I, who were part of World War I. They were essentially soldiers, but they were never really given credit for it. And it's about their treatment, their service, and things like that. So June takes this manuscript and works it over, changes details to the plot, and she feels this justifies what she has done because she's not plagiarizing Athena anymore. She feels she feels that it is her own work. She sells it for a massive amount of money, becomes a literary celebrity based on this, and of course, things get complicated over time. Someone starts tweeting at her as Athena Liu's ghost, and she struggles with guilt and questions of representation. Her publisher is worried about the visuals of a white woman publishing a book about the Chinese experience, so they encourage her to change her name and go by her full name and use her middle name as her surname. So instead of being published by June Hayward, it is published by Juniper Song. And that is sort of designed to be racially ambiguous. And she gets an author photo that is also designed to be sort of racially ambiguous. The book is sort of a satire. I'm hesitant to use that word because I think satire gives people a sort of knee-jerk reaction. Some people hate satire. That's fine. And it doesn't quite have a feel of a satire. It kind of does, but it is a very sharp critique on the publishing industry. It is also a critique on the sort of social media world that we live in, and how authors also have to be social media figures, and how when you put yourself out there as an author or as a social media figure, a lot of the time you will take down other people. You're always looking for a hook that you can use to get more likes, to get more interaction, to get more people looking at you, because that will help you in the future. And it's also about the sort of frailty of an author or somebody who you want recognition, and how difficult it can be to put yourself out there and then to feel criticized by people who don't like your work or don't like you. Obviously, a lot of this is taken to, I don't know how exaggerated it is. I did work in publishing for a time in another life, and I was much more at the entry level, but when I left, so I wouldn't have experienced a lot of what June experiences in the publishing world, and I certainly would not have experienced it from the angle that she does. I was a publisher and at a very low level, but some of it does feel very accurate based on my experience in the publishing world, and it feels very accurate based on the representation. It deals with cancel culture, it deals with cultural appropriation, it deals with a lot of really heavy things. The tricky thing is, the story gets complicated really quickly, and novels like this are always at their best when they are sort of creating the complication. They're tying all of these really detailed, elaborate knots that get you into the world and have you experience all the things that R.F. Kuang wants you to experience, like the discussion about cultural appropriation and representation and own voices, and whether or not June is stealing someone else's work. June doesn't think so. But June is an unreliable narrator because June has a very specific bias about her own actions. So the book is at its best when it's creating those knots. Untying them is really difficult. And I do think toward the end, there are some missteps, and there are some things that are a little overly complicated. There is one element, like Athena's ghost starts popping up in places, and June starts to become convinced that she's being haunted or that someone is messing with her. I think that element could have been either downplayed or removed. But, and no spoilers, that's as spoilery as I will get. I do think it lands in a good place. R.F. Kuang manages to end on a note that really does make you think and sort of brings things a little bit full circle. Not quite, again, no spoilers. It's just, it's for the same reason I'm always suspicious of locked room mysteries, where it seems like the crime itself is impossible because no one would be able to get in, blah, blah, blah. Inevitably, those books are fun when you don't know how it happened, but once you have to start providing answers, it starts getting less fun, to me at least. And that does kind of happen with this book. However, it's a really enjoyable read. It is cynical and kind of mean-spirited, and that's actually kind of fun. The audiobook is great. It reads very quickly. I didn't finish Whose Names Are Unknown until Monday or Tuesday. So I started Yellowface. I think I started it on Tuesday. So I must have finished Whose Names Are Unknown on Monday. I was done this morning. So I got through it really quickly, and the book really compels you to keep going. I probably would have been done faster if I hadn't been spending so much time this week really enjoying love songs. By the way, I didn't mention this. I sailed through the last 300 pages of love songs. I should have mentioned that earlier, because I was really savoring the book and taking my time up to a point, and then at one point it just became compulsively readable. But anyway, had I not been at the compulsively readable part of the love songs of W.E.B. Du Bois, I probably would have finished Yellowface faster. It's compulsively readable, it's fun, it says a lot, it makes you think, and it does kind of reflect the world in a complicated way, but in an interesting way, and probably at least a partially honest way. And you know, as a white person, it is interesting to think about the things that it brings up and the methods of storytelling and who can say what. It's a lot of fun. Do I love it? No, I don't think I love it, but I did really like it. So that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. Now I was in a bit of a quandary because I'm trying to decide what my next physical book is. I need to be doing A Room with a View this month for the E.M. Forster read-along. Details of that will be linked down below. And Joel finished Arthur and Teddy Are Coming Out by Ryan Love this week, and he really loved it and wants me to read it. I was thinking I would save this for June for my Pride Month pile of possibilities. There have been some recommendations for good audio versions of A Room with a View. However, the 2 good recommendations are not available to me. So I don't really know what I'm going to do, but I think I'm going to keep my husband happy, because happy husband, happy marriage, and do this first really quickly. And then I'll either do this on audio or I'll circle back to it and try to finish it before the end of May. That's the plan. I have 3 other books from the library. One of them is So Big by Edna Ferber, which I'm planning at the moment to be my next Pulitzer Prize read. However, I'm thinking at this point, I'm going to return. I have a copy of it, but it's Franklin Library edition, so I don't want to read my Franklin Library edition if the library has a copy that I can use. So I'm probably going to return it and revisit this idea in July, because in June I need to be reading Pride books. The other 2 books I have from the library kind of fit the Pride Month brief. So if I manage to squeeze in Different for Boys by Patrick Ness, which should be easy. It's roughly 100 pages and a lot of it is illustrated. If I don't get to this before June, it'll be fine as a Pride Month Pile of Possibilities book. And the other one is When We Were Sisters by Fatima Asghar, which just won the Carol Shields Prize for Fiction, the inaugural one. So there is a queer element to this book, so this can definitely transition over into June as well. So I'm going to let those sit, and I'm going to try to read this quickly because, as I said, Joel really liked it, and I could do A Room with a View in June because E.M. Forster was gay, but I think I'm going to try to do it in the spirit of the Discord group in the month where we're supposed to read it. So these will probably be next. Don't know if A Room with a View will be audio or if I'll try to do the print book after I finish Arthur and Teddy. That's what likely is going to happen. Anyway, I'm going to stop here. I've been talking a lot about the books that I read because I'm really enthusiastic about them. These are great books. I would say I definitely like Whose Names Are Unknown and Love Songs more than Yellowface, but Yellowface is a very interesting book. Like I said, it's kind of fun in a mean-spirited kind of way, and that can be a ride sometimes. So I thought it was very interesting, and I enjoyed the process of reading it. I would love to hear what you've been up to this week, what you've been watching, reading, any of that stuff. Let me know in the comment section down below, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.